Direct-to-video sequels to older, bigger films are nothing new, and there are dozens of bargain bin continuations of action films ranging from the atrociously awful to the surprisingly good. We even now are getting Kickboxer Vengeance, a sequel still starring Van Damme, but I'm here to talk about the sequel to another Van Damme action classic, Hard Target. That one was directed by John Woo, probably the greatest action film director of all time. This one was directed by the guy responsible for The Marine 2, Death Race 2, Death Race 3, The Scorpion King 3, 12 Rounds 2, Behind Enemy Lines 4, The Man with the Iron Fist 2, The Condemned 2, and now Hard Target 2. So don't go in expecting a classic, but do expect someone who at least knows what they're doing with this sort of thing. With Scott Adkins replacing Van Damme as the lead being hunted by an unhinged businessman running a human hunting ring, this time played by Robert Knepper, who pretty much plays the original's Lance Henriksen, and relocating to the lush jungles of Myanmar, this is a pretty ambitious action flick that does make great use of its leading man. Though I'm not sure I'd class it in the surprisingly good section of DTV action sequels, it does almost make it. Filmed in Thailand over just 20 days, we follow Adkins as someone actually being hunted this time, versus in the original where Van Damme was helping bring down the ring, but not actually officially the hard target. Bearing in mind that the shoot was so short, this is very obviously a DTV sequel to the original. But that doesn't mean it's immediately bad, just a lesser film. The director knows what he has in a guy like Adkins, and puts him to excellent use. We begin with this pretty fantastic MMA fight, and almost every time Adkins has to go hand to hand, this is a film worth seeing. Sadly, when lesser martial artists end up on screen, we have to resort to shaky close-up stuff, which in contrast to the other well-shot, well-choreographed sequences, feel even more shoddy. There are valiant attempts at tying this film to the original, outside of the obvious plot influences, to varying degrees of success. There are obvious callbacks and Woo-esque flourishes, with of course the use of slow motion, the main stylistic holdover. Woo used slow-mo in Hard Target either to add emotional impact to a moment, showcasing a reaction, or a particularly brutal hit forward hardfall, or to extend an otherwise complex moment that might be over in a couple of seconds to something easier to understand and follow. I didn't quite get that sense here, with much of the slow-mo really feeling there to simply be there. It does showcase Adkins' movement well, and augments cool hero shots, but that's about it. It does work, don't get me wrong, but it lacks that narrative and stylistic reasoning that comes of it being a tool wielded by a master like John Woo. And that's the big thing here. Sadly, this is a sequel to a film directed by an absolute master on a much smaller budget and shooting schedule, and you can't help but feel it. Depending mainly on Scott Adkins does help, but things like the awful CG blood and rushed editing, such as here cutting around the otherwise amazing martial artist Chi Yanin's fight sequence. It cuts away at surprising times when you really want to see what she's doing, which I think is probably because of the lack of time for blocking and choreography. Which means it lacks the beautifully constructed flow of the original. You don't get that here. I know that they were forced to depend on things like this over this, due to budget and time constraints, but I wish they found more creative ways to cover these scenes. If you can't afford to have someone's throat slit, or you don't have the time to reshoot over and over in case it doesn't work, why slit their throat? That said, for something trying to follow up a film with such dynamic scenes as this, it does a pretty good job. Adkins is always watchable, the locations are unquestionably beautiful, and if you're looking to watch a recent film with some decently hard-hitting fight sequences, you can do far worse than Hard Target 2.